Friends and enemies, welcome to another episode of Malvo Talks. Welcome to the Green Chi Network. And for those of you who are listening by way of a podcast, I am Ethan Malvo, and we are going to continue with the series of episodes that I have made on the Nazi influence. And this is going to be the Nazi influence part 3. And in this last and final episode of the Nazi influence, I'm just going to tie up a lot of the loose ends from the previous episodes. I want to take this opportunity to straighten out a couple of things, because we in the modern era, as I started to say in the last episode, we in the modern era are influenced by the Nazi or the Third Reich, I'll put it that way. We are influenced by the Third Reich in a variety of ways, to which we are either ignorant or indifferent to. One of the things that we have got to come to terms with in terms of the Nazi influence is just simply the fact that so much of our present day world in terms of Western civilization has been affixed to a Nazi rudiment in terms of the politics. As I said to you in the last episode when I was talking about Hitler as politician, we must remember that Hitler was not an intellectual. He did not found fascism or even totalitarianism. But what he did do was perfect them to such an extent that Mussolini, who was the founder of fascism, and fascism, for all of you who have been thrown a lot of different definitions, fascism is simply the complete and utter subjugation of a culture to a singular political idea. And the definition of totalitarianism is one-party rule of the state. But as I made clear in the last episode, we must understand a lot of the terms that are thrown at us in terms of the media, in terms of even our education system, don't really get at the central core. You see, both sides of the political spectrum, both liberals and conservatives, take something from the Third Reich that carries on until this very day. And we must understand that the effectiveness of the Nazi policy was very hard in the aftermath of World War II to wipe away completely. Indeed, the thing that the conservative takes away, and I say capital C conservative, takes away from the Third Reich is the populism and the idea which was renewed. It wasn't originated by the Nazi, but was renewed by the Nazi conquest, is that a thriving economy is the most important political foundation you can have. And it trumps all moral regard and all moral inhibition. The other thing, of course, is from the capital L liberal side, and that is what they took away from the Nazi is the idea of the superiority of the state in all issues, and the expansion of the state into all arenas, and the trampling of individual rights. All of these things the liberal took away from the Nazi history and years in power. Now, one of the things, and then I'm going to read a couple of things to you, one of the things that has bedeviled, and I said this in the last video, one of the things that has bedeviled our modern politics, and the reason why our modern politics are so dysfunctional, is because just as Hitler came to power in a time of crisis, so did a lot of other unique politicians. You see, it wasn't just Hitler, it was other politicians. FDR came into power, Mussolini came into power during this period, Churchill, in France, General de Gaulle, slowly but surely came out of this generation, and as I said in the last video, Francisco Franco. See, all these leaders brought their unique talents into a situation, indeed a crisis in political leadership. And what we have today is a similar thing, because the parties have not delivered on their promises, and the parties have not made the modern life a worthwhile life. And you see, the ability for Hitler to delegate in terms of with the intellectuals he brought into his Third Reich, into his regime. You know, Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Goebbels and even Mengele can be thrown in there. I could have devoted this in large part to the Nazi science and how that has continued apace in our modern world. You see, because it is with the Nazi, in the midst of the horrors of the concentration camp, we're able to make many scientific breakthroughs. And that has not been forgotten by the modern world. And this is the reason why we're having a very hard time in terms of scientific ethics. But the great thing, I guess, the overarching idea, I shouldn't say it's great, but the overarching idea that came out of the whole Nazi science program was that no moral inhibition should stand in the way of the advancement of scientific research. And that continues apace. And we have all kinds of experimentation. I think that the great Nazi idea is that the human being is no different than a machine, which can be used and abused and then thrown away, just as you would throw away any kind of machinery or gadget. This is the singular, really, how can I put this? That is the singular pathology that continues to operate in our modern politics. But I want to get back to the idea of how the United States, and then the other unique things that we probably are not even aware of, that the Nazis did have influence on. But I want to get back to the pardoning that the U.S. did in terms of the Nazi criminal, so that we could build on their work and use it as a foundation to continue to govern the world and to thwart Soviet aggression. And I'm going to read to you from the memoirs of one of those pardoned Nazis. This book, The Service, which is the memoirs of General Reinhard Gehlen, was published. And you see, Reinhard Gehlen was very practiced in espionage. But I want to read to you an excerpt or two from this book, wherein Gehlen relates how he was pardoned. And I'm going to start from page 11, and I am going to begin to quote from him directly. And he says, for a long time, I'm beginning to quote, for a long time, our future was in the balance. This is Gehlen talking. Given the political situation in August 1945, it was understandable that nothing could be decided at once. Perhaps it was not a decision that could be made by the American commanders in Europe anyway. Booker, now that's his American contact. Booker told me years later that it soon became apparent that the Pentagon wanted to have all our documents sent over to Washington, but not us. There was absolutely no desire to have us continue working. But he had been able to persuade Sibbert's headquarters that these documents should not be separated from the experts concerned. That was how I and a handful of my colleagues came to be sitting in General Bedell Smith's personal plane, flying to Washington at a time when the Russians were still dealing as allies with the other three powers in London over plans to prosecute the war criminals. I left Wessel in Europe, now that's his right-hand man, with Booker's Lieutenant Comstock to act as my locum tenens in my absence. The agreement we had struck remained in force. He was to undertake no active operations for the Americans without my written authority. But short of that, he was to try to maintain contact with any of our former colleagues who might prove useful in the future. Men such as Lieutenant Colonel Herman Baun, who had controlled our espionage activities in the Soviet Union. Clearly, one reason for shifting us to America was a desire to reduce the risk of an indiscretion in Europe. By now, we had all been deleted from the American prisoner of war lists, with the curious result that as late as 1949, the Counterintelligence Corps still had me on their wanted lists. On the other hand, our ship to Washington would enable negotiations and discussions to be conducted in a more conducive atmosphere than the turmoil of war-torn Europe. Now you see, this collaboration between our government and the Nazis beginning to take place. And I am going to just read another excerpt, if you will allow me, to bring this point home. Because this is not in your history books, folks. And we've got to understand these things better and clearer. And I am now going to quote from page 225. And I'm going to take it from the top paragraph. Those of you who want to get the book, those of you who are in the podcast can't see this, but I'm going to hold up the book cover so you can see it, The Service, so you can see what it is. You can get it on Amazon, I'm sure. And I am going to begin reading. I had agents, this is Gellin talking, watching the communist movements in virtually every country of the world. Only in the United States did we refrain from establishing a network of our own, for the FBI functioned perfectly, and we needed only to address our inquiries to it to learn all we needed. I attached particular importance to establishing contacts in even the remotest regions, the remotest regions, to ensure that we had some opportunity of gleaning information independently of our allies. It was in these remote regions where intensive espionage would have proved very costly that the work of our analytics section came into its own. Our evaluators pieced together their reports from scraps of information until the mosaic was complete. I tried to put to good effect all the latest technical aids in the expanding the basis of our intelligence work. I took a personal interest in investigating and testing the modern processes and equipment. I was fascinated by some of the items involved, the codes, chemicals, and inks. I made a point of reading all the scientific journals and visiting the laboratories where special devices were developed and tested, both in Germany and the United States. We carried out advanced electronic research so that our workers in the field would be properly equipped. And a computer was installed at Pulak, not only to aid our code breakers, but as a data bank. At the time of my retirement, however, we had still not solved all the problems connected with the computerized data processing. I also had experts studying possible applications of specialized fields like medicine and psychology and intelligence work. I had in mind the possibility of compiling psychological studies of leading enemy figures. I'll end it right there. Don't talk about Edward Snowden. Reinhard Gellin was doing all that back in the 50s. And don't worry about our response or even Donald Trump's response to Charlottesville. We made our deal with the Nazis. In the earlier, I think it was part 1, earlier episode of the Nazi influence, I said we had a ex-Nazi war criminal running the Kennedy Space Center. See, we made our deal with the Nazi because we needed his expertise in order to run the free world. And let us not be naive and romantic about that. Let us not make excuses for that. We had to have that information if we were going to maintain our position. We had to maintain that kind of connective tissue. But you see, you're not taught about that. You see. And those Nazis who were pardoned either by us or the Soviet Union or by many of the various states in the Middle East to do work for them and to set up military and espionage services, they too have influenced our politics. And I'm going to read to you now from a book written by Peter Townsend. Now, Peter Townsend was the equerry to King George VI of Great Britain. This book, by the way, is The Last Emperor, so you can see it. Those of you in the podcast, the title of the book is The Last Emperor. And I'm going to read to you from this book because as the equerry, he saw the dispatches that went by the king's desk. And he helped the king, this is Queen Elizabeth II's father, organize as well as craft memoranda based on those dispatches. His chief claim to fame, I have to say this as an aside though, in the pop culture as being Princess Margaret. Now this is Queen Elizabeth II's sister, late sister, Princess Margaret's boy toy. Now that's his claim to fame in the pop culture. But the real value of his commentary is in being able to tell us what was going on and what he himself was reading in terms of the national secrets, I guess, of Great Britain that were declassified. And here he makes this point. This is on page 163. Events were sweeping the Palestinian Arabs on towards their tragic fate as a multitude of stateless refugees in a squalid homeland of hovels and hutted settlements. The underlying cause of the Palestinian Arab tragedy was Islam, the final solution. Total extermination of European Jewry, now in full-scale operation by the Nazis, with whom, terrible irony, the Palestinian Arabs' temporal and spiritual chief, Hajj Amin, Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, was presently hobnobbing in Berlin. With Hitler's blessing, Hajj Amin was raising a Muslim army of liberation. Its main unit was a division of SS, the 13th Handschar, recruited in Bosnia and fitted out with fezzes, emblazoned with the death's head emblem of the Huns. Hitler agreed to the Mufti's demand that no Jews, now listen to this, no Jews were to be ransomed. All were to be exterminated. That diabolical clergyman remarked that this would provide a comfortable solution to the Palestine problem. Now you see that the genesis of not only the Palestinian but the Arab opinions about the dissolution of Israel. You see, the Holocaust denying that you hear from people and politicians like Ahmadinejad or other politicians in terms of Hamas and the complete obliteration of Israel started with not Arafat, but with, I should say, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who, you see, made a collaboration with the Nazi regime. That's why he went to Berlin to talk to Hitler himself. And the Grand Mufti also explored many of the concentration camps, the death camps, so that he could see how the Nazis were exterminating the Jews. You see, the origins continue to this day, and this is why, as far as Hamas is concerned, the only solution to the Middle East question is the complete annihilation of Israel. So too in terms of Iran. Indeed, after the war, as I was saying before, many of the war criminals went into exile in the Middle East, the Nazi war criminals. And in the movie Exodus by Otto Preminger, this is alluded to, how they were influencing the former Nazi war criminals who went into exile, were influencing Arab politics towards Israel. But you can see now, yes, it is true that the Egyptians and even the Saudi Arabians or even the Syrians will make stopgap or even ostensibly make treaties with Israel and find common ground with Israel. But when push comes to shove, they will always be very reluctant. Indeed, I would even go so far as to say that they will always be in the camp of pathology and political theory, that Israel is, and sooner or later, must be removed and extinguished from the Middle East, if only because it is a way of the European and the American to keep interfering in Muslim politics. So that is the origins of that. Now I'm going to finish off this talk by reading you the Nazi influence on one of the most influential and indeed popular Arab politicians of his generation. And I'm going to start by reading this letter that was written, open letter really, that was written to Hitler. And it begins this way. I congratulate you, he's talking to Hitler, with all my heart, because though you appear to have been defeated, you were the real victor. You were able to sow dissension between Churchill, the old man, and his allies on the one hand, and their ally, the devil, on the other. Germany is victorious because it became necessary for the world balance of power, that Germany be created anew, whatever East and West might think. There will be no peace until Germany is restored to what it was. And this is what West and East will bring about in spite of themselves. So much for the present and the future. As for the past, I think you made some mistakes. But you are forgiven on account of your faith in your country and people. That you have become immortal in Germany is reason enough for pride. And we should not be surprised to see you again in Germany or a new Hitler in your place. Anwar Sadat. As you know, Anwar Sadat was the one who, at the Camp David Accords, made peace with Israel, but was assassinated by the Ayatollah Khomeini's partisans in Egypt. And the point about that kind of influence, you see, we don't get that in the news media. But this is how the Nazi influence continues to make and break and undergird our policies here in the Western world. Indeed, and I will close with this. It is the success of the Third Reich that ripped up the last vestiges of Christianity in civil society. So that what we have is a situation today where the Nazis' hand can be gleaned in much of our lives and in our general political situations. And here I will put my period and thank you for tuning in. And I hope that this has been an enlightening journey learning about the Nazi influence. And I hope you enjoyed the entirety of that series on the Nazi influence. I try to talk about unique subjects And I thought that that letter from Anwar Sadat was a bombshell that helped me to frame just how influential. I mean, we look at what's going on in terms of terrorism and the Muslim as being strictly a religious thing. In reality, it is something much more complex and something that has its rudiments in even the Third Reich. And many of the policy positions follow after that. I just want to clarify something that I said in the video where I was talking about what the capital L liberal takes away from the Nazis. And I neglected to say that the nationalization of economic and other institutions is what the capital L liberal takes away from the Third Reich because of its successful annexation of industry for the purposes of the state and the aggrandizement of the Deutschland. But I can only continue to give you information like that if you are generous with your donation. And here I want you to please, if you find the time and if you have the heart, to please make a generous donation at my PayPal account, and that is paypal.me/ETHAN905. That's paypal.me/ETHAN905. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment in the comments section. I enjoy reading your comments, and it helps me to craft these shows so that I am more attuned to the kind of things that you want to explore and would like to see in a future show. So again, leave a comment in the comments section, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the video, and I will see you in the next video.